Hey everyone, this is your favorite history buff. We are traveling with history. Today, I want to go through part 2 of James Madison, his presidency. I don't think I can go through every detail, but I believe I can go through the most important parts. I do hope you all enjoyed this. I worked hard on this research. Enjoyed quite a bit of it myself. This may involve some unexpected things. Some things obviously expected. Shall we begin? Now, as for his presidency, I want to go through the election of 1808 a little bit, policies before the War of 1812, the election of 1812, which also was during the war, policies during the war, and the policies after the war, which took a little bit. I'm not going to go through the entirety of the War of 1812. This is more of to focus on President James Madison, not the conflict itself, though we'll get into those. Other than that, why don't we move on? Election of 1808. You gotta remember, there was no term limits back then, so Thomas Jefferson followed George Washington's example of only serving 8 years. There were some in the Jeffersonian Party, or Democratic Republicans as we know them today, that preferred Vice President George Clinton, and others preferred James Monroe. But James Madison won, and George Clinton went from being Thomas Jefferson's second vice president to James Madison's first vice president. I'd say the first man to serve 2 presidents as vice president. Now, the Federalists tried to portray Madison maybe as a puppet for Napoleon or a patsy. Yes, the Jeffersonians were pro-French relations, but that didn't mean they were patsies. His primary opponent, Charles C. Pinckney of South Carolina, Rufus King of New York, both soundly defeated. James Madison became the 4th president of the United States. Not bad. Now remember, in this rough start, James Madison was Jefferson's Secretary of State, and he helped him with the British Embargo Act. Now that he's president, negotiated British Minister Erskine went to revoke the embargo. Of course, the Foreign Secretary Canning canceled the agreement. Madison learned this 6 weeks later, putting back the Non-Intercourse Act. He persuaded a reluctant Albert Gallatin to remain a Secretary of Treasury. And there were still tensions with Spain over West Florida. He renews an act, a militia act, allowed him to call out 100,000 militiamen. Now, him and his predecessor argued about West Florida being part of the deal in the Louisiana Purchase. Spain and France, no, they would not have that. Though he did eventually annex West Florida to prevent the British occupation. There's that part. There were still rising tensions with the British. McConn's Bill No. 2. They did allow American ships to carry French or English goods. Neutrality was tough. Trade wars came to be, as he did threaten to stop trade with the British. Despite any threats, they were unfazed. He also replaced Robert Smith with James Monroe as the next Secretary of State, with James Monroe on the right there. He also sent William Henry Harrison to deal with the natives in the Indiana Territory. Yes, future Presidents James Monroe and William Henry Harrison. Stories for another time. But you get the drift. He was handling quite a lot on his plate. Nobody said being president would be easy. Madison's no exception to that. As for the military matters, in the background picture is a Louisiana swamp, maybe a modern day one. But I wanted to put that because under his presidency, Louisiana became the 18th state of the nation. House of the Committee Foreign Relations authorized him to organize an army, 10,000, and of course 50,000 volunteers. They refused to empower his navy, though. The relationship with Canada and France went downhill. And don't forget, it was back then when Democrat Republicans did not see the importance of a standing army. Oh, that would change, though. Now, for his re-election. During this time, woo, wasn't it rough? The British captured American sailors and forced them to serve in their navy. That's when he had it and declared a proclamation of war. The British Foreign Secretary announced the end to the orders and council with the announcement being a little too late. Suppose a peace. It was a rocky start. Madison wanted Canada, but it didn't go quite that well. There was a retreat at Detroit, Michigan, and the governor and General William Hull. But despite that, Madison still won re-election when he defeated DeWitt Clinton of the Federalists, 128 to 89 electoral votes. He still faced criticisms, and it was called Mr. Madison's War. The war raged on. Not exactly pleasant, but that's what happened. Madison had his 4 more years, so to speak. As for any more nominations, William Jones replaced Paul Hamilton as Secretary of the Navy. John Armstrong replaces William Eustis as Secretary of War. They're both pretty incompetent. Winchester's battle ends in a disaster, and Madison has to rethink his Northwest strategy. That ambition wasn't going to happen. Although Russia did offer to mediate peace between the United States and Britain, John Quincy Adams, Albert Gallatin, and James A. Bayard were sent there. Doesn't look like the British were up for this one. So, peace didn't quite work out with the Russians. There were still changes to come. Battle of Thames, for instance, very successful, led by William Henry Harrison, landed the British and Indian control. I guess you could say that defined the Northwest Territory and a little bit of Upper Canada. Madison, again, still haven't had enough. Called for a complete embargo on Great Britain. He appointed Henry Clay, Albert Gallatin, James Bayard, Jonathan Russell, and John Quincy Adams to negotiate with the British of Sweden and Belgium. A little context. Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun were war hawks. They wanted this war, much to Madison's dismay. George Washington Campbell replaces Albert Gallatin as the Secretary of Treasury. And to make matters worse, Napoleon, who was fighting the British on another front, his own accords, he lost to them, and Madison, realizing this, knew he had to change his strategy. He repelled a trade embargo with neutral nations. Guess he needed more resource and more trade in order to succeed in this war. Wasn't that he had many options. So, he went on with that part. And lo and behold, time to change and see what happens next. This one was the most humiliating part of his presidency. The British, well, let's just say they took over the White House in battle as revenge for the torching of the Canadian parliaments. Despite Madison's noble efforts, he's forced to flee. And he's actually a sitting president that rode into battle with them. But at this point, he separated from his wife Dolly. Madison refused to evacuate until she saved the portrait of George Washington. Then eventually she evacuated and reunited with him. The White House wouldn't be fully rebuilt until the next presidency, so Madison didn't live into the White House for the rest of his life. Despite this humiliation, he did ride and encourage the troops. I believe that's when his presidency really shined. He really showed he was a man of the people, cooperated with them. He mingled with them on horseback. It was very nice. I think that's what made him more popular as president. Now, let's get to it. The comeback would be several Navy victories against the British. He also named James Monroe Secretary of War to replace John Armstrong, and replaced incompetent ones. James Monroe served as both the Secretary of State and Secretary of War until the end of the war. He also appoints Alexander J. Dallas as the new Secretary of Treasury, replacing incompetent George Washington Campbell. And, much to Madison's dismay, Andrew Jackson disobeys his orders and pursues the Creek warriors in Pensacola, West Florida. Despite success. Now, the Treaty of Ghent, that was signed in Belgium, December 24th, 1814, by the United States and Great Britain. However, communication with the technology, lack of technology back then, they were still fighting to go on before people would realize, hey, peace is signed, the war's over. So Andrew Jackson did the Battle of New Orleans, repelling a lot of British with his few ragtag men, well, many, but still outnumbered. The War of 1812 did eventually end. In 1815, February 13th. Kind of funny how things work out. 3-year war. The way I see it, I don't think anybody gained anything out of this war. But, hey, it was considered the second war of independence for the United States. They survived another one. That is also when James Madison and the rest of the Democratic Republicans learned the importance of a standing army. That was also a heavy blow to the Federalists, who never really got any power ever again. The context on that, they were hampering James Madison, the New England region, which was predominantly Federalists. They thought to secede back into Great Britain. Well, that was a mistake. I can't blame anybody for leaving the Federalists after that. Although they still did have judicial power. But other than that, that was along the lines of things. James Madison also dealt with the Mediterranean pirates. They attacked them during the War of 1812. Let's say, after that war, Madison declared another war on the Algiers, May 10th, 1815. Sent Captain Stephen Decatur, who leads a flotilla to retaliate against these pirates. Doesn't go too well for the pirates, so Algiers, the nation surrenders June 30th, 1815. Shows how powerful the United States has come to be, even surviving against the most powerful army of Great Britain twice. But other than that, get on to the next part, shall we? The last policies. Now, you gotta remember, Madison was a centrist in his presidency. He signs a bill that recharters a new national bank in Philadelphia, 21 years. He also signed a bill which made Indiana a state on April 19th, 1816. I believe 19th. He also vetoed Henry Clay's bonus bill for internal improvements. Despite all the disasters, I believe President Madison led this country into a budget surplus. And, of course, that led his successor to be another Democratic Republican. I know that's a story for another time, but that'd be his Secretary of State, James Monroe, succeeding him. I want to thank everyone for watching this YouTube video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. Ding that bell if you want more. Remember, this was part 2 of 3. part 3, we will discuss Madison's post-presidency up to the final years of his life. But let me know what you think. If you have to comment, keep it friendly. I don't want any trouble with anybody. We're all adults. Let's act like it. Bye now.